Welcome to the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall. This is the June 16th edition, and our topic for the day is a certain type of critical reasoning with blanks in the prompt. What is important to realize that someone saying hasn't begun, we're just starting, so welcome. What you do need to realize is that blanks in the prompt is not really a single type of problem. But what we did notice in going through a few of these that were in GMAT Prep is that a lot of them have the same sort of template. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. So again, be aware that blanks in the prompt is not a single type of problem. However, there seem to be some types of blank problems that show up more than others. And so one of those is today's theme. But again, for the 1,000 millionth time, make sure you know that there's not, some people ask questions like, how do I study for blank problems? It depends on what words are around the blank. It's unlike other question types, those are not all the same. Like you can have blank problems that are strength and weaken, you can have blank problems that are draw the conclusion, you can have this, you can have that. So there we go. But first, as usual, we have to start with the usual warnings. So, all right. Problem submissions, please don't submit problems that are too general. Please don't submit problems that are too specific, and please don't submit personal issues. It's important that we go over this because almost 100% of the submissions in the last couple of weeks have not followed these guidelines. In particular, we had a lot of people just send a problem with answer choices and no other commentary at all. They just, here's a question and here's A, B, C, D, and E. That's not how submissions work here, unfortunately. That's what our forums are for. So if you submit it, if you just have a single problem to submit, then please post that problem along with your questions about it on the forum. So also, people haven't been doing this too much, but please don't submit problems that are too general or study plans. But do not submit just a single problem, because the study halls have themes. So we need some sort of more general issue. Like a few students in the last few weeks have asked, how do I handle problems where there's a blank in the critical reasoning? That's a general question. That's something that is worth it as a study hall topic versus just some random single question. That's what we have forums for. So please submit a topic that is of intermediate depth, and please submit a topic that ties into a more general question. So if you do give me a specific problem, you have to ask a general question afterwards. Also, make sure you know this. Do not submit problems from the official guide. Please, please, please. If you do, we just have to ignore them. So this is one person's submission. This person obviously took a lot of time to compose this submission, but unfortunately we have to ignore it because the GMAC people have explicitly requested that we avoid using OG for copyright reasons. So please don't use OG. Also, please don't submit single problems. So you can submit a single problem, but not unless there's some sort of larger content to go with it. Because again, otherwise, forums is where these things belong. So this thing right here, this is the sort of thing that should be posted on our forum. Okay, smiley face if you guys understand these rules. I mean, I know there are people other than you who are submitting these problems, but please give me the smiley face icon over there if these rules make sense. Okay. We've had a lot of submissions in the last couple of weeks that we have had to ignore for these reasons. So or at least to just say put on the forum. Okay, and finally, you've seen this a few times, please check the archives. We've had 37 of these sessions, I think, so far. That's quite a few. So if you have a topic to submit, please do me a favor and look through the list of previous topics and see if it is there. Because we don't really want to get repetitious. I mean, if we do this study hall for a few years, I'm sure at some point we're going to start having repeated themes. But for now, we would like to try to have new content in each study hall. So if you want to submit something, please check here. Someone in the text box says, can you provide the link of archives? The archives are on the front page where you sign up for it and where you submit questions. You just have to scroll down. So notice I wrote here, please scroll down. Right there. So that's where to find them. I guess some people don't scroll down and don't know that those are there. But that's if you miss the session, that's where you will see the recording of the session too. I mean, these dates are all clickable. Okay. Any questions before we start looking at some of these problems that have blanks? Smiley face if this stuff makes sense, and if you're ready to move on to some things. I see one person is typing. Alice21 is typing. Alice is no longer typing. Okay, let's do some problems. Remember, in case any of you are new to this, let me do a quick review of what's going to happen. What you should see as of right now is the following buttons. You should see these buttons up in the corner of your screen. Right here. Smiley face if you see these buttons. Okay, that's not a lot of smiley faces. Do you guys have the polly buttons? Okay, good. All right, please use these buttons to indicate your answers. So when you indicate the answer, you'll be able to see it, I think. I'll be able to see it. Other students will not be able to see it. Please click your answer exactly one time. Because if you click twice, or if you click any other even number of times, then the second click will erase your answer. Okay. If you want to change your answer, then please click exactly one time on the new answer. I mean, again, because if you click 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 times, then you will have nothing on your screen. So please click a single time. Also, please don't answer in the text box, because then everybody will see it and people will be influenced by other people's answers. So please don't answer in the text box. And I think that about covers it. Okay, let's do a problem right here. Okay, again, please use these buttons to indicate your answer. Thank you very much. Give you a timer on the screen. Go for it. Okay, we got a few people who don't have answers to this. I'll give you about 15 more seconds. Remember that the GMAT is a test on which you have to answer every question that is put in front of you. And in fact, if you don't answer a question, you will not be able to move on to the next one until you do. So we've got a couple people. I'm still waiting for a mic. Sharad and Pratik. Okay, just Mike and Sharad. All right, let's close it. Oh, sorry, I left the room. Okay, so here are your answers. I'm going to go ahead and resize the question a little bit so that you can see, so that we can write other things on the board. If this new size is too small, then please tell me on the board, or tell me in the text box, please, if this is too small. Okay. Which of the following most logically completes the argument? However, that statistic would be what we'd expect, even if volunteering does not boost longevity. Okay, there's a little bit bigger. Let me know, text box people, let me know if that's good. Okay, what is going on in this argument? Like, when you see a blank, you have to figure out, you can't just, there's not going to be any prompt words that kind of clue you in. So you have to figure out how the blank fits into the regular template of critical reasoning, how it fits into the argument. Usually, once you figure this out, usually but not always, the blank questions are of the same or of similar types to what you're usually used to seeing. So the same types to which you've already become accustomed. So in other words, when you see a blank problem, it's probably a strengthen or a weaken or an assumption or some question like that. But you don't know which one it is until you actually examine the way the question is written and see how it's put together. Does anybody know in the text box? First of all, here are your answers to the question. So there's a lot of very popular answers to this one, it looks like. So we'll wait for the actual answer to it here in a little bit. But there's not a lot of agreement here, so this should be an interesting discussion. Does anybody know, why do I say usually here? Because there are always a couple of weirdly outlying questions. I mean, arguments are unique and fluid things. So, I mean, all arguments don't fit in neatly into a couple of templates. Most of them do. Not all of them. There's a couple of problems here and there that don't really fit neatly into any of the templates that we've got, but they're outliers. So same thing in quant, there's always a few problems that don't fit neatly into any of the boxes that we have for quant problems either. Like there's some quant problems where you have to just picture things in your head. Like how many points can a square intersect a circle, which, you know, it's not really a geometry problem, that kind of thing. So there's always a couple of outliers. I mean, priorities is the name of the game. You can't be overly concerned with a couple of outliers. Instead, you have to be concerned with what you will usually see. And if there is a problem here and there that is weird, then you deal. Okay, does anybody know what type of question this is most similar to? So, in the text box, which type of question does this most resemble? And to this question, a couple of people are saying cause and effect, but I want to make sure that we can also talk about it in terms of the type of thing you're being asked to do. So either like strengthen or weaken or explain situation or draw a conclusion or assumption. Which type is this? I mean, it does involve cause and effect, but cause and effect is not a question type. It's a situation that you might see in a question type, but it's not actually a question type. So a few people say weaken, a few people say draw a conclusion, a few people say it looks like explain a situation or something like that. Well, let's talk about it. what does this signify? However, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I mean, what is this? We'll come back to this slide in a second. But what is this relationship? So you have a bunch of things. However, blah, 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 because blah, 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 blah. This is not the case whenever you see the word however. It's this combination of this and this in response to what is above. So I mean, let's talk about what is going on here. I mean, a couple of you guys are saying contrast, but let's try to be more specific than that. Because I mean, what's going on here is actually something that is very particular. So how about something like this? The Economist says that the economy of, I'm going to make up a country called Burdistan, is strong because unemployment numbers are low and the government has been creating new jobs at record rates. However, so there's no right answer to this, but in the text box, see if you can give me something that would fill in that blank. And also that blank. So again, there's no single answer to this. There's no right answer. I mean, answers could possibly be wrong or not make sense, but there's no single right answer to this. So give me something that could go in those blanks that you are making up yourself. And then we'll talk about it. And when you do this, try not to think too rigidly in terms of, yeah, okay, we'll wait for a couple other people. Okay. These are good, what people are writing right now. Let's see what, a couple people are still typing. So let's see what the rest of you are typing. Yeah, so what you guys are doing is the right idea. So now let's try to explain. But before we even try to explain, I also want to make a point here that is somewhat important, which is that you guys are not really having a lot of trouble coming up with this stuff. And I think the biggest reason for that is that you're not trying to think as formally as you usually do. Like, in other words, you're not trying to think as though everything is some hard algebraic rule. Because like on the forums, we have a lot of people who treat critical reasoning as though it were almost a math problem. Like, how do you use this equation and how does this work? So the first thing I want to point out is that when you're answering these things in a text box, it's a lot less formal. So when you think less formally about critical reasoning, it's easier. So if you're going to get one lesson out of this, it should be this one. I mean, you can't really approach this stuff too formally. If you do, it's like, what's going on here? So notice how much easier it is to think about these problems in the way you just did when you had to make your own. And you're like, oh, hey, it's like regular thinking. So when we give you like rules and guidelines and things, just remember that those things are meant to shape your normal thinking, but they are not meant to replace it. You are still supposed to be thinking like a normal thinking person here. So, okay, let me pick one of your examples. Let me pick one of your examples that works well here. Let's see. However, I'm going to adapt it a little bit. I'm going to give you two examples. First, I'm going to use an example that I made up, and then I'll look at one of yours in the same light. However, something like this claim is, however, these statistics do not actually support the government's claim, or support the economist's claim, because the government jobs are temporary and funded from money that will soon be exhausted. So let's take a look at what's going on here. I mean, a couple of your other arguments fit this well, and we'll import those in a second. But smiley face, if you see how this works. Smiley face icon. Okay, so what's going on here is basically the economist is making an argument, but then we're saying it does not support the economist's argument. Same statistics. So what that means is this is a problem where we're trying to weaken the argument. Because remember what you do when you weaken the argument. You have to weaken it within the constraints of what you already have. So this means that we have to poke a hole in the argument, so to speak, while still using all the facts that are here. I don't want to say using them all. You don't have to use them all. While still accepting the facts here as true. So in other words, you cannot contradict what is written up there. So I do want to make the point that a couple people tried to do that. Like one person wrote this. One person wrote standard of living will be low because of fewer jobs. And that's not, you can't do that because the passage actually tells you that there are more jobs. So new jobs at record rates, sorry, that's supposed to be a highlighter. If the passage says that there are a lot of new jobs being created at record rates, then the one kind of thing that you can't do is this. You can't contradict that. Like if the passage says there are more jobs and they're being created faster than ever, then a statement that says there are fewer jobs is wrong. So yeah, but what you're going to do is, let me check that question out in the text box in a second. So this is how weakened questions work. You have to bring in something from outside. So from outside the scope to make the argument weaker. The difference with the blank is just that you have to figure out what the conclusion is that you are actually trying to weaken. That's the difference. So, because it'll usually, like, these statistics do not actually support the economist's claim. So what they're saying here is that the economist's claim is what we are trying to weaken. So we'll go back to the original problem with this analysis in a second. But hold on just about 15 seconds. I will hold on about 10 seconds, sorry. Sorry guys, sorry for that brief delay. Okay, so however, this does not show that blah, 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 blah means blah, 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 blah is what we want to weaken. And then we bring in something from the outside. So do you want to say that the part after however? Yeah, Alice or Elise, I don't know if you're Alice or Elise, depending on what country. We should not question the fact before however. Right. If things are stated as facts, you cannot question them. That is the point. Like, when you have to weaken arguments, you have to weaken them on other merits. You have to bring in something from the outside. If something is stated as a fact, then it is a fact, and there is nothing that you can do about that. So, unemployment numbers are low, fact. So if you say someone else in the text box said there was high unemployment, someone wrote this is only true because it is recovering from high unemployment, but if unemployment is low, then unemployment is still low. That's the point. So if it used to be high, that doesn't really weaken the argument because it is not high anymore. So the facts here are the facts that are here. On the other hand, this is new information that suggests that these jobs might just go away really soon, or that the government won't have enough money to maintain those jobs after a while. So, but yeah, let me go ahead and type that in the corner of this slide as well. Do not question stated facts. All right. This works. We can also use V.T. Sanders says economy is not strong because the jobs are not private sector. I don't know enough about private versus public sector to really know how that plays out in the argument, but if that does provide a reason why it might be less stable. Like if public sector jobs are inherently less stable, then yes. Although the GMAT would have to tell you that. I mean, the GMAT wouldn't expect you to have economic knowledge. I noticed you were typing something, so feel free to type. But yeah, there's no outside knowledge required other than things that are common sense that your people on the street would know. So let's go back to this. However, that statistic would be what we would expect, even if volunteering does not boost longevity. So what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to weaken? This is harder than the one on the last slide because I'm going to switch slides here. These statistics do not actually support the economist's claim. Okay, fine, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, you have a claim and you are going to try to weaken it. That's right out there. Here, on the other hand, we don't have something that says, however, XXXXX is not necessarily true. So we have to do a little bit of inferring here. Does anybody know what are we trying to weaken here? Text box, please. Okay, a couple of you are still typing. Weaken the claim that adults who regularly engage ... I don't know what claim, Sunil, I don't know what claim you're talking about. The statistics can't be wrong. So, no. Remember, statistics are facts. Okay? So, you cannot weaken the statistics. So let's do this. Facts. I'm gonna put facts in green here, and then I'm gonna put. Remember, you can't weaken things that are facts. You have to weaken things that are claims. The claim might be implied, or the claim might be explicitly in the argument, but you can't weaken facts, guys. Remember this. So facts. I'm gonna put in green. Facts are facts are facts. If something is a fact, you're done. You can't question it. So this is stated as a fact. So it is a fact. This is another fact. Like, these people really do live longer. That's not something you can question. Okay. On the other hand, here's a claim. Aha. There we go. That's a claim. So we're weakening that claim. In other words, the argument claims that volunteering and endorphins and its attendant endorphins, in addition to that's a good way to write that, actually lengthens people's lives. In other words, that it actually causes people to live longer. That's what we're trying to weaken. So we can't weaken the fact that volunteers are people who live longer. That's not questionable. That's stated as a fact. But what we do need to do here is weaken the idea that this is actually brought about by volunteering, that it's actually a result of doing volunteer work. So those people who stated cause and effect, you are correct. Although also you want to make sure that that's the type of argument, but you also want to make sure you understand what is happening with the argument. So how do you weaken a cause and effect argument? Text box. Let's make a new line. Let's make a new slide for this, because there are enough of these. How do you weaken a cause-effect argument? There's two ways. Okay, let's just do this by way of example. Here's my example. Let's keep it simple. Married men live longer than single men. On average, married men live longer than do single men in the same geographic area and socioeconomic class. Therefore, one may conclude that marriage causes men to live longer. Okay, how would you weaken this argument? A couple people are saying another cause. Not really. That's not gonna do it. Like, if I show you that exercising also makes you live longer, then that's not. Maybe you guys don't mean what I think you mean here, but just because something is caused by X doesn't mean it can't also be caused by Y. So give me a couple examples of how you might weaken this argument. Text box if you have any examples. Show that single men live just as long. No, you can't do that because the facts state that that's not true. So, yeah, actually, I'm gonna change this from live longer to make more money because you'll see why in a second. It's gonna have the same structure. So make more money causes men to have increased earning potential. Okay, I edited the argument. The new argument is, well, if single men drink more, then that still is marriage causing people to live longer. So no. But let's do this new argument. But Gaurav number 2 is correct with his weakener. The other ones are not. Show that single men live just as long. You can't because it's false, according to what the argument said. And then single men drink more, so their health is worse. Well, if getting married would stop the drinking, then that actually supports the argument, not against it. Okay. Same thing, Alice. If married men don't smoke, that helps the argument because that's another reason why marriage is actually making people live longer. So, but let's do this argument. On average, married men make more money than do single men in the same geographic area. Therefore, one may conclude that marriage causes men to have increased earning potential. Sorry for the shift of focus. I'll tell you why I did this in a second. I'll tell you why we moved from the original argument to this one. Maybe, Gopal, I think you might be misunderstanding the geographic area thing. This means in the same one. This means that you're comparing married and single men who live in the same place and who are in the same class. So those words are just there to prevent you from comparing married men in America with unmarried men in, like, some African country or something, so that it gets rid of those effects. You're comparing people who are in the same place. Maybe married men are older. That's true. Let me fix the argument so it doesn't work like that anymore. Generation and, okay, so I added generation. So now these people are the same age, and they live in the same place, and they're in the same class. Yeah, okay, Sunil has one way to do it. Sunil says, and Derek has the same reason. So Derek and Sunil are giving an example of what I'm going to call the first type. Here's an example of this. When men earn more, they are considered, they are pursued more actively by women seeking to get married. So in this case, this is a weakener because this actually suggests that, because like this is a fact, but we don't know why it's true. So that's a fact. You can't question this. This is the claim. This is what you can attack. You can provide alternatives to this claim. So, but we are just guessing that this is the case. So, what's going on here is one way to weaken X causes Y is to give evidence suggesting that Y, that it's backwards. In other words, that Y actually causes X. So in this case, instead of saying that marriage makes men earn more, we're saying that earning more makes men more likely to get married. So that's one kind of weakener. Here's another kind of weakener. What if it was something like this? The same personality traits that cause men to have high earning potential, such as a sense of duty and responsibility, as well as a conservative temperament, also cause them to be more likely to desire marriage. So, you guys, there's a lot of words here, but basically this is saying that if you have people who are like steady, stable, responsible type people, then those people are more likely to be good at making money, and they are more likely to get married. So what this is saying is that you can show, and maybe this is what you guys said when you said another cause. If so, then you are correct. Another way is to show that something else causes both X and Y. So, there you go. Smiley face if this makes sense, because if some random other thing is causing both of these, then it's not X causes Y anymore. It's Z causes both X and Y. So now let me quickly explain why I switched the argument by illustrating what would happen if I had. So, and then we'll come back to the original problem here. So why did I switch the argument? Here's the original argument. The original argument was that married men live longer than single men of the same age, geographic area, etc. Therefore, marriage causes men to live longer. And here's the things that here's our forms of weakeners. So this would still work. Like this one on the right over here, this would still be, you can still do this. In fact, you can do it with the same argument about personality traits. You can say the same personality traits found in men who want to get married, such as stability and future time orientation, are also generally found. They also contribute to longevity, to living longer. The reason why I didn't stick with this argument is because the other one is ridiculous. Like, you can write something like, living longer makes men more likely to get married. I mean, you can, from a purely logical, like I'm coding and writing a program standpoint, this works. But it's not reasonable because people don't get married when they're really old. So this is not something that could make sense in the real world. Because, I mean, you know that this is just not reasonable. So I mean, this works logically, like, from a computer type standpoint. But it's not reasonable in the real world. So, okay. Yeah, there. Hefner was married for a while. Okay. So, can it be possible to weaken the argument so there's a correlation between marriage and... a correlation is what the argument says at the very beginning. That this is a correlation. So, maybe you should brush up on what correlation means, because correlation is just this. Correlation is when this is high, this is also high. When this is low, this is low. That's what all of these are. So, if you said there was a correlation, that would just repeat what the passage already says. Okay, let's go back to the original problem. So the original problem says that volunteering, let's go to the next page. The original problem says that volunteering lengthens people's lives. So the argument says volunteer causes long life. Remember that there are two ways to weaken a statement like this. Here they are from the other slide. So if you had something, one type of weakener here would be something that shows that living longer causes volunteerism. This is, again, logically reasonable if you are a computer, but this is not, I mean, common sense, this is not going to be right, because it's not like, oh, hey, I'm 85 years old and I'm still alive, so I think I'm going to go volunteer. No. So, that's not terribly reasonable. But if you can say, if some quality is present in both, or if some quality contributes to both volunteerism and long life, then the argument is weakened. So this is the only reasonable way that we can do this, because the thing on the left is not reasonable. So what we need is something that contributes to both volunteerism and long life, and that's what A does. Being female. Choice A says that if someone is a woman, they are likely to volunteer more, and if someone is a woman, they are likely to live longer. So that's what's causing this. It's not cause and effect. They are both effects of being female. Smiley face, if this makes sense. Okay, there's only 5 or 6 smiley faces, so smiley face again if you understand. Okay, I mean, if you want, we can like map these things, you know, like if you, let me make little diagrams if this helps you. Like this is like X and Y, this is like saying that it's Y causes X, and so because of that, we know that X does not cause Y. Here, it's different. We're saying that X and Y are both results of some third thing. So the reason why this doesn't work, that's a crossed out arrow. The reason why that doesn't work is because actually what is going on is that this is causing X and that this is also causing Y. So, yeah, well, right, Chandra, but are you arguing with out of scope? Because remember that all answers to weakening questions are out of scope. All of them, 100% of them. If you have a weakened question, it is impossible for the answer to be in scope because you would not, you have to weaken it. You have to bring in outside information. Again, if you don't understand that, think about this example. Where are we? Like, once you stop thinking like someone who has to memorize lots of rules, this will make a lot more sense. Like, this is a totally new fact. This is not in the original passage about the economy, but it weakens the passage. And that's how passages are weakened. You bring in outside information, always. This is, if you are thinking like a real world person, this is not hard to figure out. If you are thinking like a memorizer of rules, it's really confusing. So don't think like, oh my God, I have to memorize all these rules. If you do, then critical reasoning will not be accessible. So I hope that helps. So what we're saying here is that you have volunteerism and you have long life. But in this case, it's female that causes both of these things. So not the volunteerism itself. That was a not very good arrow. There's a better arrow. Okay, so we are not showing this right here. Okay. All right. As the most popular wrong answer to this question was C, so let's just talk about why C is wrong. C is basically trying to say that these endorphins are like masking the symptoms, which in other words, C is trying to explain why the endorphins might lengthen your life. But C is actually strengthening the argument because C is showing how this might happen. Like, it has been suggested that, like, people are just guessing that this is true. But C provides a definite path. Like, C provides evidence that endorphins really do make you live longer. So C is actually a strengthener of the argument. Let me type that. C actually strengthens the argument because it provides concrete evidence that endorphins boost health and hence may indeed help you live longer. So this is important. I mean, a lot of people picked C. I think maybe you just got turned around and didn't know which side of the argument you were supposed to be on, because C is backward. Like, C is contributing to this whole claim. Any questions about that? Text box, please, if you want to know about the other questions. Otherwise, we'll move on to a new one. I see that Sid is typing and then Elise is typing. So I'll wait for those two, and we'll move on. Okay. About D. I thought that if symptoms are masked, then it will go diagnosed. Right, although mask the symptoms is a generally a mask the symptoms right there, mild. Okay, I could see where you're going with that, but there's two things wrong with that reasoning. Sid says, okay, let me make some room for this. Okay, this is what Sid wrote. If symptoms were masked, then it'll go undiagnosed. There's two things wrong there. The first is that if this were the case, then that would be, you would expect an effect in which endorphins shorten your life. But the fact is that, let's see, volunteering, even if volunteering does not boost longevity. Okay, I mean, what you're trying to show is that, you're trying to directly address the issue of volunteerism. Not so much the issue of endorphins. And so what this is doing is it's kind of arguing about a minor point regarding endorphins, but it's not addressing the main point of the argument, which is whether volunteerism is caused by, or whether volunteerism causes people to live longer or not. Like this, in other words, you might be questioning the angle by which it would happen, but you're not questioning that it does happen. So there you go. Because, I mean, this statistic would be what we would expect, even if. So the claim here has to do with just the statistic and the longevity. This is one possible explanation, but we're trying to weaken that claim by looking at it through alternate views. The question is just whether there's a cause and effect here or not, I guess is the best way I could summarize. At least I already addressed A. In fact, I addressed that exact aspect of A. So please check the recording and listen to the explanation about 5 minutes ago when the recording is posted. Basically, it's fine. In weakening problems, you have to bring in outside information. So there's no such thing as irrelevant just because we don't mention these things. There's a fuller discussion of that a few minutes previous. So that'll be in the recording. Okay, let's move on to, someone said D. Well, it is rare for a person to do this. It doesn't matter how rare it is, because we're just concerned with people who do it. Like the argument says people who do volunteer have this experience. That has nothing to do with how many people actually volunteer, so D doesn't matter. Okay, let's look at this one. Here's a timer. Again, please answer with the buttons. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Milan, not sure how to pronounce it, Michael and Eddie, and Alejandra. Please pick an answer. Okay, still Alejandra, Eddie. Okay, maybe you guys are away. Here are the responses from the class. There you go. Okay. So this one I think people are having an easier time with than the other one, but let's discuss. Let's reduce the size. Again, if it's too small, please go ahead and let me know in the text box. But we need some room to write on the screen. Although TDX has been used by fruit growers since the early 60s, a regulation in force since 1960 has prohibited sale of fruit on which any TDX residue can be detected. These are facts. That regulation is about to be replaced by one that allows the sale of fruit on which. So whenever there are lots of words, what it can help you to do is to rephrase into your own words. So in this case, it used to be if you could find anything on the fruit, if you could find any TDX, then it was prohibited. So before 1960, the old rule says if they can detect any TDX, then the fruit can't be sold. The new rule says trace amounts of TDX are fine. This is in my own words, but it helps you, at least in your head. You don't have to do it on paper. Obviously, that would take you a while. So it's in your head. That's what the facts say. What are we doing? What are we trying to weaken? Like what claim, text box please, what claim are we actually trying to argue against here? The argument says, however, the change will not allow more TDX to be on fruit. So what are we arguing about? Yeah, Derek, and then let's see if anybody else. Sunil is typing, so we'll wait. But Derek basically has it. Let's see what Sunil is typing. The regulation will not make a difference is what we are saying. That's not what we're arguing against. Maybe that's what you're trying to say. So what we're arguing against is the idea that it will allow more. So let's make this explicit on the board. Our argument is that the new rule will not change anything. It will not allow more. The new rule will not change anything. So we are arguing against the idea that the new rule will allow more TDX. Because that's what in this case, it actually gives the counterclaim in what we're saying. It does not show that X means that X is something we are trying to weaken. So that's basically the deal. This does not do X or does not show that X. Because. So we need some sort of thing that you can treat this as a weakener, or you can treat it as like an explain the discrepancy. It's a very similar situation in this case. But we need something that shows that the results of no TDX allowed are the same as the results of trace amounts allowed. So what that's going to do, that's what choice A does. Choice A says you can't even find amounts that are that small anyway. At least you couldn't back when the old rule was in effect. So, because the only difference between these two rules occurs for amounts of TDX between 0 and trace answers, and trace amounts. Because these are the only things that are, please don't mess with the board, thank you. Let me just take away the ability to do that, and that'll do it. Okay. The only thing that's different in this argument is for really tiny amounts of TDX, because for anything more than trace amounts, both rules are the same, so that's not an issue. So the only difference is that the new rule allows amounts between 0 and trace, and technically the old one doesn't. But what this rule, what choice A says is that they couldn't even find amounts between 0 and trace. So that makes no difference. So in other words, under the new rule, these amounts are okay because the rule says they are okay. But under the old rule, these amounts were okay because they couldn't find them. So they would be fine. It does matter that it's 1970 because it says it will not allow more X than in the 60s. So it's a comparison between the new rule and the 60s. Not the new rule and the whole old rule. Just it'll be the same amount that it was back in the 60s. So that's why pre-1970 is okay here, because you're talking about the time frame that we want to be talking about. So that also addresses the question from Milan, yeah. Okay. Other questions about this one? Any of the other choices that you guys want to ask about? If you smiley face if you're ready for a new problem. If you want to talk about one of the other answer choices here, please type it in the text box. Okay. How about this one? Why not E? The presence of TDX, well, the E is just talking about what TDX does to people or doesn't do. That doesn't have anything to do with the argument. Because the argument is just, here's what the argument is just if there's X amount, then you can sell it, and if there's Y amount, then you can't sell it. The argument has not anything to do with the results of TDX. It's just, here's the rules about when you're allowed to sell it. So E is not on the same page as this argument. Well, okay. I mean, D says that some people break the rule, but that doesn't have anything to do with how the rule works. I mean, the question is what is allowed and what is not allowed. D is just saying that some people break the law, but that doesn't counter the argument. It's kind of like if we're talking about speed limits, you know, here's what is okay, here's what is not okay. If you say, well, a lot of people speed, not relevant to what we're talking about, because this is just a discussion of what the law, of what's written into the law, not people's compliance with it. Okay, I think Milan is typing something, so. No, still irrelevant, because it still says the change will not allow more TDX. I mean, will not allow is just theoretically what is written into the law. Will not allow has nothing to do with what people are doing. So if you say the law does not allow people to bring, bottles on airplanes, if you say more people are doing it, that's not at issue. I mean, that might have something to do with how well the law is enforced, nothing to do with what it allows. Okay, let's look at another. Let's look at this one right here. This will probably be the last one for today, but maybe we'll continue this in the next session. Go for it. So, sorry, here's a timer for about the other half of the time. Okay, let's see. I think we just about all have answers to this. I'll give you another 10 seconds if you need it. Okay, let's talk about this. The growing popularity of computer-based activities. Here's your class. Let me resize the question. Here are the answers from the class. Class statistics right here. So pretty good performance. Let's talk about it. The growing popularity of computer-based activities was widely predicted to result in a corresponding decline in television viewing. So this was a claim. People thought this would happen. Fact, recent studies have found as a fact, people who own computers watch significantly less television than people who do not. So this is another cause and effect situation. So this finding does very little to show that computer use tends to reduce television viewing time. So let's take this to the next page. I'm going to kill the answer choices, and we'll talk about it the same way we talked about these things before. So remember that there are two ways that we can weaken this kind of thing, because this is another one of those cause and effect arguments. So here's what we had on the other page. This argument is a cause and effect argument. In other words, more computer time or computer ownership correlates with less TV. Therefore, computer ownership causes people to watch less TV. That's what the argument is saying. So this is another case where they are trying to argue that X correlates with Y, and so therefore X causes Y. So there are two ways in which you can weaken this. The first way in which you can weaken this is to suggest that it's backward, which would be watching less TV causes people to go buy computers. This is not totally ridiculous, but this is not very reasonable. Because, I mean, there are things that might randomly make people watch less TV, but the fact that the idea that this would cause people to go out and purchase computers as an alternate form of entertainment seems a little bit far-fetched. So, but the other case would be some factor contributes, some other factor contributes to both computer ownership and also viewing less TV. So in other words, if we made a diagram of this, like one of those primitive little diagrams that we made before, if we can find some factor that contributes to both of these things, then we are good. So we just need to find what it is. What factor is that? So let's look at the answer choices. We want a factor that contributes to, let me see if I can grab those things off the board. Okay, we're looking for this. So C does that because it's demographic group. This problem is actually a lot like the last one with women who are volunteers. It's the same demographic that is doing both. So, same demographic group. Just like saying women are the ones who usually volunteer and women are the ones who usually live a long time. Therefore, it's just being women who. So demographic group meaning like a certain social class or something like this. People who belong to some social class are more likely to have computers, and they are also more likely to watch TV less. So C does that and is therefore the correct answer. As far as other choices go, choice A, it's important to, choice A is a common type of wrong answer, and I think a few people picked it. So it's important to realize what is going on in choice A. I mean, choice A just says there are outliers or exceptions to the trend. Okay, this does not have anything to do with the trend. I mean, this does not address anything because the existence of the trend is a fact. Like, it's a fact. It's green up here. It's fact. There is a correlation between people who own computers and people who watch less TV. So even if there are exceptions to this trend, then we don't care because the trend is still there. It's kind of like if I say people who eat less usually weigh less. If you say there are a handful of people who have metabolic problems who eat less and who weigh a lot more, that does not destroy the trend. In fact, basically every trend will have exceptions. Every trend that these kinds of things talk about. You don't need a perfect lockstep correlation. So make sure you know this. This is a very common type of wrong answer, but if there is a trend, then there is a trend. And the fact that there are a few exceptions doesn't change anything. Does anybody have any questions about the other answer choices? I mean, most people picked either C or A. So if you have issues with any of the other choices that you want to talk about, please indicate in the text box. Choices E. Many people use their computers primarily for tasks. what E does is E just says it leaves more time in which these people could watch TV, but they still don't do it. So this doesn't really address the issue. Like, the issue is that it's a fact that these people don't watch as much television. What choice E says is they have the time and they could watch television if they wanted to. But the fact is they still don't. So what we are trying to explain is why they don't. So this is a hypothetical that these people don't actually do. Also, again, it's many people. Many people means, you know, some small subgroup of what we're talking about. So regardless of what this says, you're talking about a few people out of our whole sample. Sid and Elise are typing. Sid, the question says, how far out of scope can we go? I don't really like that question because the question sounds like you are looking for a rule that you want to memorize. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but do not even think that you can approach these kinds of problems with memorization. This is a warning that I do need to give. Do not approach critical reasoning with memorization. Do not think that critical reasoning has absolute rules. I will make a statement, and that statement is this. If you try to memorize rules for critical reasoning, you will get worse at critical reasoning. Your score will go down. I pretty much guarantee this. Well, let me clarify what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that what I'm not saying is that you shouldn't know guidelines. I mean, you do need to know guidelines. In other words, you have to know how the problems work. And you have to understand what things like assumptions, etc. are. But that's different. I'm not saying you don't have to know guidelines. But if you're looking for rules that you can memorize, you will not be able to make that work. It is not going to be possible. And that's why these things are on this test. That's why there are so many of them. Because this is a management test. Like, the purpose of this test is to make sure that people who just memorize rules and grind them will never score well in the verbal section. That's the whole point of this test, and it's really important that everybody realize that. Because it's a test for management. Like, the one kind of person who really should not be in management is the type of person who just memorizes everything and then does what they are told. Like, that is the kind of person that you would not want in management. And that's why the GMAT works the way the GMAT works. I mean, as an illustration, again, make sure you understand that. Like, remember this. Remember this problem. The reason people found this one easier to understand was that they were not trying to think in terms of rules and not trying to memorize stuff. They were actually thinking about the problem. So it's critical reasoning. I mean, that's the title is critical reasoning because you have to use reasoning. You cannot just memorize rules. So there's no rule for like how far out of scope that you can know. Like if something has to do with the argument, then it is relevant. Like this is totally outside the scope of this argument. Like these things are not discussed at all. But if there is a common sense connection to what is in the argument, then it's fine. Like there are no objective degrees of out of scope or not out of scope. If it has to do with the argument, it's fine. If it doesn't, it is not fine. If you watch the study hall about strengthen and weaken problems, then I talk a little bit more about this. But you do need to basically use your common sense to decide what is relevant and what is not. Okay. Well, Alejandra, if you see this kind of thing, again, please try not to make this into a rule that you can memorize because you can't. But if you see this kind of relationship, the idea is to think about what this would be if it showed up in an argument, and maybe if there is a language barrier that might be part of the issue too. But make sure that you know how these things are used in arguments. Like if the argument were, I think if you are who I think you are, then your native language is Spanish. If you had an argument in Spanish that was like blah 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 blah, sin embargo, blah 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 blah, ya que, blah 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 blah, it would be the same thing. Oh, sin embargo, okay, they're saying something in contrast to the original argument. Ya que, here's my reasons for that, and weaken the conclusion. So same thing in English, however, because that kind of thing. Also remember that weaken and strengthen are basically the same thing if you just consider the opposite claim. Like weakening, so there's not a hard line difference between those things. What I mean by that is like this one. Weakening X and strengthening not X are the same. So there's not really a difference between weaken and strengthen. For example, if you weaken the statement that the new rule will make changes, that's the same as strengthening the statement that it will not make changes. So there's no difference here. If I weaken the statement, you will grow taller, that's the same as strengthening the statement that you will not grow taller. So the skill sets are the same for those two. Qualifier words, that's a little, Gaurav, that's a little bit off topic, but if you post, you can post that question on our forum and we can address it there. Please, you know where the forums are. Please use the general verbal folder to ask that question here. Let me just make sure that you know what I'm talking about. This question that was posted in the text box, this is a bit off topic for today's session. So let me just encourage you to post that on the forum in the general verbal folder. If you, when we'll get to that. Okay, let's quit. No, it's fine. I mean, just make sure that you, I mean, if there were extra time, I would go ahead and talk about it, but we're over time already. So go ahead and post that. If you want an email link, I'll try to get to it quickly. If any of you have any last minute questions here, Let's try it. Let me edit the front page here too, because it turned out that another main theme of today was cause and effect arguments. So let me add that to the front page. Okay. Otherwise, we're done. Weakening cause and effect arguments. Okay, I gotta run, so I'm gonna log you guys out pretty soon. If you have any questions that are directly related to MGMAT business and so on, please ask. Otherwise, have a wonderful 2 weeks. And yeah, the time was weird this week. The times are going to be sort of weird during the summer, too. There's going to be a lot of these at 7 Eastern for various reasons. The times will be weird. But I know that the marketing people had some issues with the scheduling this time. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and log you guys out. In the next 2 or 3 minutes here. So have a wonderful 2 weeks.